Chapter 4 is called Conditional Code. Let me explain the term conditional. So far, every program that we've written starts at the top of the main and runs down line by line, executing every single line until it gets to the end, at which point it stops. That is how programs have been working so far. And you may think to yourself, well, isn't that the way programs always work? How else could it possibly work? Well, there are certain occasions where you don't necessarily just want to run top to bottom executing every line of code. Sometimes you might want to skip certain lines of code. Yeah, okay, it could. Depending on certain things, you may decide that certain code is not appropriate to run. You may want to handle a bunch of different possibilities, and each possibility may be completely separate. There are other times when you might want lines of code to repeat many times. Computers are awfully good at doing repetitive tasks. And so you may want to say, add up all the numbers from 1 to 1,000. That's 1,000 different additions. Are you really going to type in 1,000 additions into your line of code? You're going to have 1,000 lines of code, and most of them are going to be additions? I don't think so. Those are called loops, incidentally. We're going to get to loops very shortly. And there's going to be still other times where you find certain sections of code that need to be accessed from time to time. You may say, well, I've got a bit of code here that does a certain task, and I need to make it run that bit of code now, and I'm also going to need it to run again in another 30 lines of code, and I'm also going to need to run it again 60 lines later, and I'm going to need to run it again 100 lines after that. Now, you could just copy and paste the code from place to place, but that seems a little crazy. So there's another construct in the C language for doing that, and that's called functions, or subroutines or procedures if you have been using other programming languages. These are all ways that programs do not necessarily run top to bottom executing every line of code. We're going to focus on the most simple of all. It's called the if statement. We're going to look at the if statement and the if-else statement in this chapter. We're also going to look at the switch statement, which is a kind of fancy if-else statement, sort of. We're going to look at Boolean expressions. I'm going to explain what a Boolean expression is and what the word Boolean means. And we're also going to briefly look at the goto statement, and then I'm going to explain to you immediately after that that I don't want you ever to use a goto statement. It is part of the C language, but it's not recommended that you use it. Okay, and that's what this chapter is going to look like. Let's begin with the if statement. The if statement is a very simple piece of program control in C, and in fact in any language. In C, an if statement looks like the following, and I'll just describe what you're seeing on the screen. If a certain condition is met, then perform some code. Okay, that looks fairly straightforward. Now, what's not said there is that if the condition is not met, then you don't perform the code. You only perform the code if the condition is met. Let me give you an example. Let's say you've just read in somebody's name. You might say, well, if the name is longer than 50 characters, then we want to get them to perform some corrective action on that, like maybe put out a message that they've made a mistake, get them to re-enter their name, and then move on. That's a possibility. So how would you do that? How would you read that? You would say something like, if the name length is greater than, say, 50, then perform that corrective action. And if the name, of course, if the name length is not less than 50, then you don't have to perform the corrective action. It's quite simple. Now, I want to focus on that condition. Conditions are quite special. Conditions are expressions that you'll see in a moment that must be true or false. Let's think of the term, the name length is greater than 50 characters. That is a statement that is either true or false. The statement cannot be true and false. It is one or the other. That is very, very important, the concept of true or false. So we will look at that very shortly in more detail. But for now, I want you to understand that if the condition is true, then the code gets executed. And if the condition is false, then the code does not get executed. And that's the rule, and that's all there is to it, really. So let's move on and look at an example of that. Here's a slight variant on our old age program. If you look at the code, you'll see that it's an extremely simple program. Get someone to enter their age, they enter it, and then just print out how old they are. Okay, I don't think there's anything particularly clever about that. So I'd like to introduce an if statement into this program. I'd like to say that, well, let's invent something. If the age is greater than a given magic age, then we'll print out some special messages on the screen. So let's say the magic age is about, well, let's say 40, and if it turns out that the age they entered is older than 40, then we'll tell them that they're very old, and we'll also tell them how many years older than 40 they are. That's what we'll do, but we'll only do that if they're older than the magic age. So let's see how we might do that. First of all, I'll have to define the magic age. So that's int magic age, and we'll have, I suppose we'd better say what the magic age is. We'll initialize that to 40. Okay, excellent. Now we'll move on and we'll create an if statement. And we'll do that after we've read in the age. We'll say if, and then a certain condition which I'll get to in a moment, and then we create some brackets. Curly brackets at the beginning and the end of main, curly brackets at the beginning and end of if. These brackets here are round brackets. Now you can see that this looks a little bit like a printf. It looks, well, here's the printf, and here's a bracket, and here's another bracket. You think, well, surely if must be some kind of clever function then, just like printf. No, that's not true. Printf is a standard C library function, while if is part of the C language. It's part of the vocabulary of C. It's got nothing to do with this space here. I don't need that space. I could write that like that. It would still be exactly the same. The biggest difference is there's no semicolon on the end. That's the difference between that line and that line. If I put a semicolon on the end right there, then the program does not work as expected. It will certainly not do what I want it to do. It will still compile. There's nothing technically wrong with that, but it won't run properly. The number of times people have come to me and said, Mark, what's wrong with this piece of code? It doesn't seem to be doing what I want it to do. And I look through it. It's one of the first things I look for. And I'll say, aha, there it is, a semicolon on the end of an if statement. Very, very common. I stress to you, please try and watch out for that. You get into the habit. Every time you close your brackets, you tend to put a semicolon in there. We've got them 3 times already in this program. 1, 2, 3. Try not to do it out of habit. Try to do it only when you need it. Okay, so let's have a look at the lines of code that we're going to do if the condition is met. We'll say something like, you are very old, and put a new line, and that will be the first statement that we do, and the second one will say how much older than the magic age they are. So we'll say you are %d years older than %d. Okay, that seems reasonable. And another new line, and it will be, well, that's a good question. What will it be? How many years older? Well, let me see if I can show it to you. Age minus magic age, comma, age. No, comma, magic age. We're going to go over the length of a line there, so I'm just going to split it onto the second line. So that's the first %d right there, age minus magic age. So let's say the age they entered was 45. Then 45 minus 40 is 5. So it would say you are 5 years older than the magic age. Okay, so that's probably going to work. The only clever thing left to work out is this condition. So what will the condition be? Okay, what I'm trying to say in English is if the age is greater than the magic age. Is it possible to say that in C? Yes, it certainly is, and this is how you do it. You'd say age greater than magic age. The key thing here is the greater than sign. That angle bracket, or whatever you want to call it, that little arrow thing, that is known as a greater than sign. And this reads, if age greater than magic age. And that is a statement that will either be true or false. It can't be somewhere halfway in between, and it can't be both. It will be one or the other. And if it's true, then we'll execute these 2 lines of code. And if it's false, we won't. So let's compile that and test it and see if it works. Okay, firstly compile, 0 errors. Next we run, Please enter your age. Let's enter an age that's not greater than the magic age at the moment, 23. You are 23 years old. No extra printfs printed out there. Excellent. So let's move on. Try it a second time. Run again. Please enter your age this time. How about 46? Oh, we get different output this time. You're 46 years old. You are very old. You are 6 years older than 40. So that seems to be working. Okay, I'd like to point out that we have now created a program that does different things based on different conditions. The condition surrounds the age that they entered, the age of 46 in this particular case. Whatever age they entered, it causes the program to do different things. Either the program does nothing extra at all, or it gets 2 extra lines of printed information on the screen. We have not had that power before, and now we do. So that is a very clear and simple example of the use of the if statement. We're going to build on that for the rest of this chapter. I'm going to show you the if-else statement, and I'm going to show you various other operators other than greater than that you can use with an if statement. Let's move on to the next module.